So we have a webinar to do. I see we've got a few folks in. Let's dive right in. Welcome everybody. Let me get kind of myself oriented here and do a screen share. Let's see here. This is our first kind of live event for the year. Wanted to give everybody an update on kind of what's been going on inside Encode. We've been working in our living laboratory for the last little bit and wanted to share with you some of our experiences together. All right, so we have a good chunk of time blocked out for this, and I wanted to kind of dig in and share a little bit, like I said, of our experiences over the last few years. We have been hard at living into a new space. Many of you probably have been following us or know of encode.org's work. We started out about 3 or so years ago with a mission, a purpose to live into what's next on this self-organizing journey. And we launched and we started to look at what was needed to further push the boundaries of self-organization and shifting power in all the ways that we have come to want it for those of us practicing things like holacracy or experimenting with teal practices or involved in conscious capitalism or the responsive movement. Many ways this is expressing in the world. And Encode has been looking at how do we write new rule sets in systems that have not yet been upgraded. And this is what I want to share with you today. We have kind of a few orienting slides to go through, and we've got a lot of time for Q&A. Eric's here to monitor any questions that you might have through the process. Feel free to raise your hand, and we can make this as interactive as the webinar platform allows. Hopefully we can get kind of different, more interactive sessions, and I'll have a little bit more to say about that too as we continue to go on. So let's just kind of dig in. So living the power shift. What has it been like to live in this new system? And I'd like to do a little bit of compare and contrast between, on the left-hand side, a fully power shifted enterprise or a fully power shifted endeavor, bringing purposeful work into the world, versus more conventional power structures. Things that we've all grown up with, things that we are evolving away from. And this is on a spectrum, of course. I don't think anybody's perfect on one side or exclusively on one side, maybe better said, than the other. This is kind of like a polarity. There's goodness on both sides, and there's a shift happening to ever more distributed, ever more decentralized, ever more disintermediated structures. And this is happening all over the world in all kinds of industries, from travel to transportation to currency, everything, governance, everything is being, to the extent possible, decentralized, disaggregated, disintermediated, all those D words, right? But that's just abstract stuff, right? And the rule sets can get too heady, too cognitive. What does it feel like? What actually changes when you shift from conventional power structures into fully power shifted structures? And I'd like to kind of take you through those elements that actually shift. So again, on the right-hand side, we have what we're used to in any legal structure, especially the for-profit variety. The nonprofit also has a fiduciary to shareholders or stakeholders or individuals, personal power holders. So right out of the gate, we shift that greater care or concern moves away from shareholders to something else, a greater care or concern, the definition of a fiduciary, to purpose. And this is huge. This shifts everything now. Instead of a for-profit or a not-for-profit or an NGO or a for-benefit or a teal organization, we are anchoring in purpose. and creating a for-purpose structure. Everything hangs on purpose. For those holacracy practitioners out there in the world, this is not new news and pretty familiar territory. Purpose becomes the new boss or central authority figure in holacracy. One might say that everything hangs on purpose and everything is unpacked to express purposeful work in the world in a system like holacracy. We move away from voting rights, owners with control, shareholders that can actually exercise personal power based on financial stake. While that's gotten us a long way for sure, there are interesting and better options, we think, of making everyone an investor with the ability to integrate perspectives. Instead of having control, we decouple ownership from control. We make everybody an investor, and everybody has a perspective to be integrated into the overall running of the enterprise. We're used to boards and board of directors being made up of personal power holders, folks that have standing in the community or industry experience that's needed, but show up mostly as personally politicking or personally conveying power at a board level. And we want to shift away from this to something else. Something that holacracy, I think, brings us really, really well is 21st century governance. So instead of personal power holders on a board, we've experienced a multi-perspectival, integrated dynamic governance circle, or top level body or broadest level body, the anchor circle as a replacement for the board. And so it goes. We have lived into now for 3 years a completely different way of thinking about legal, capital, ownership, and investment structures. And we have legal agreements that have been power shifted so that others can do this too if you want to. We have purpose-aligned investment interests across multiple classes, no longer just the capital unit holders or the stockholders, if you will, and everybody else. We have purpose-aligned founding members as opposed to founders fused with power, the whole founder fusion thing. So we have new pathways to start entrepreneurial endeavors without all the unwanted things, new ways to surrender into purpose right from the start, and play a new way of fundraising or bootstrapping startups with dynamic equity, as opposed to predictive ownership and capital tables. For those entrepreneurs out there familiar with that, we all have to kind of play the classic game of what should the equity structure be? Is this a 50-50 deal, a 33-33-33 deal, or something else? And mostly it's based on predictive ideas of what we each should hold. And instead of doing that, we play a different game. Anyway, I want to convey to you, these are real things that we have lived into and others have too, as ENCODE is doing its work in the world. This is possible now to shift power to purpose, re-envision, reimagine the legal structures that hold all of that, and play a new game together and have a new experience together. So these are some of the shifts that we find in the legal, capital, and corporate structures. And on to what happens in the organizational space or the workspace. Now here again, this is not new news for those practicing holacracy. This is, or any distributed governance system. We move away from teams, and hear folks talk about trying to build better teams. An eyebrow is always raised for me. It's like we aren't really quite yet getting at the full power shift. When we have a robust, mature, self-organizing operating system like holacracy and others that can sense into what work is needed and how to structure that work, not in job descriptions or position descriptions, but in discrete, clear roles, what emerges from that are role relationships. And the interaction and dynamics between the roles process tension, which in turn creates structure, which in turn gets work done. So this is a big fundamental shift. And there's a lot of inertia and momentum even language cues around teams and teaming. And these are some things that will begin to fall away and probably take a little bit of time as we get a different experience of living in a fully power-shifted enterprise or structure. Teams are no longer quite as necessary to get purposeful work done. We have a replacement for that, a better way, if you will, of organizing and structuring the work in role, with role relationships emerging to deal with complex work. And so it goes. So instead of leaders leading people or power holders or enlightened leaders even, or heroic leaders, we have everyone leads. We have distributed leadership. That's one of the ways of thinking about holacracy. It's a distributed everything system. It distributes decision-making, it distributes the work and the authority to lead your work, and so on. So everyone gets to lead their work in a power-shifted enterprise. Management hierarchy, of course, goes away. That was one of the fundamental offerings of holacracy, is a wholesale replacement, as I sometimes say, for management hierarchy. Lots of definitions for what holacracy is, but it is that. It is a complete wholesale replacement for management hierarchy. Management hierarchy being the conventional power distribution system. And in its place, it puts in a different hierarchy, a different structure, very deep structure. Lots have been written about this and lots of folks have experienced this. This is not a flat structure or horizontal structure. It's a really deep structure of purpose and the work necessary to express purpose. So the feeling of being inside a fully power-shifted enterprise is everything hangs on purpose, the structure and the work. There is no management hierarchy distributing power personally. So systemic distribution of power, just mentioned that. The decision-making processes shift from consensus seeking or exclusively autocratic or exclusively collaborative to something in between. We're integrating multiple perspectives on an ongoing basis to find that workable way forward always. And we have multiple pathways to process tensions. Instead of relying on others to see, or convincing others to see what you see so that we can do something about it. We have multiple independent pathways to process tensions to support purposeful work. And this is all happening in the for-purpose enterprise structure, or the power-shifted enterprise. And not new news or new experiences for the holacracy folks and some other practices that are out there in the self-organizing world. But we also have people to deal with. So I mentioned at the start, the legal and capital structures, that's kind of a new space to experience self-organization and non-personal power holding. The organizational work, a la holacracy, is a more familiar space to experience that. But holacracy gets a lot of critiques in the world for not addressing people issues, but that kind of misses the point. Holacracy was more of a distinction event. It was differentiating the work from the people and saying an organization is something separate from that. It's not a collective of like-minded, passionate people. It's actually something else. It's a construction altogether entirely different to express purposeful work in the world. It doesn't say people are unimportant or not vitally necessary to that work. Quite the contrary, it's just silent on it. And so it leaves open this gap of what do we do about people and how does that show up in a fully power-shifted endeavor. And here we have lived experience. So this was one of the chief purposes or goals, if you will, of ENCODE, was to live into and figure out from a living laboratory standpoint how to upgrade these other two systems, the legal and capital structures that we talked about, and now these people structures. So I want to give you a sense of what it feels like inside an upgraded context for the people. Instead of employee or even partner-centric culture, so in holacracy, you have the notion of a partner. It is a defined term in the Constitution. And if you're in an organization that doesn't happen to have employees, you might have a partner-centric culture versus an employee-centric culture. Now, there's nothing wrong with that, of course, but it only kind of gets you so far. because it has embedded in those structures rule sets or norms that push against self-organizing principles like transparency, autonomy, purposeful work, clear structures and boundaries. And so in a fully shifted system, we have independent actors or independent agents that consciously choose to come together with a clear culture agreement, with a clear agreement of behavior norms that we're going to abide by. So we have a clear rule set. And this is a huge leap forward, I think. And we now have direct experience of living under one of these agreements. It's been a primary point of work for ENCODE, is creating the first version of the people agreement, if you will. What encodes the behavior norms and cultures of independent actors that agree to come together and surrender a little bit of autonomy to participate in a system of distributed authority for purpose. I know that's a mouthful, and you don't have to remember it, thankfully. You live into it. And the living into it is a completely different type of experience. And what happens is all the usual things that we expect to happen in the people space, in the OD space, in the HR space, get reframed. It's not that they go away. They were never unimportant. They're vitally important. They've just been fused with the organization's work. And Holacracy and others decouple that, differentiate that. Now we have the opportunity to reimagine, reinvent this people context. And this is the work ENCODE has been about for the last 3 years. And we have, as I said, agreements that do this. And what emerges, instead of mentorship programs in a classic HR system, we now have emergent mentor-mentee relationships, a much more natural, dynamic way of individuals that have skills and capacities and knowledge and know-how and wisdom that you're attracted to and can benefit from. And then those that would be good mentees on both sides. So you might be a mentor for one and a mentee with another individual. And these are much more dynamic and organic, emergent kind of relationships, natural relationships, if you will, based on preference and desire to learn more instead of structured programs that come from authority outside of the people space. So it's an inside out kind of affair. In classic organizations, there's a whole lot of energy, a whole lot written, a whole lot of money spent on team building. That is not a bad thing. I'm not here to say stop team building. I'm just saying, in a fully power shifted system where everything is for purpose and we have differentiated spaces where work gets done and people can hang out, we don't need team building to get work done. We have a system, an organizational operating system that allows us to coordinate efforts to get work done in those role relationships again. So what do we do with the interpersonal interactions? It allows for a much more organic and natural interaction between members. A real human culture begins to emerge, as opposed to these artificial teams that are focused primarily on work. You get a much deeper, more intimate experience hanging out with those independent agents who consciously choose to come together and show up to do purposeful work. So additionally, especially in organizations practicing holacracy, there's this gap of tension processing. So inside the organization space, of course, multiple pathways to process any tension, anywhere, anytime, by anyone, to structure purposeful work. But it is totally silent on interpersonal tensions. And so for ENCODE, our people agreement now creates rules of engagement on how to process interpersonal tension. What do you do when naturally you're working together, you're hanging out together, and there's this intersubjective friction? What do you do with that tension? So our rule set now gives multiple pathways to process tensions based on interpersonal interactions, as opposed to the more classic or conventional human resource interventions for mediation or performance plans, or all kinds and varieties of ways of intervening on personal conflict. One that I'm really excited about, and we've been experimenting with all last year and have really matured up, are the notions of what to do with personal and professional development that, again, is usually fused to the organization. And in our people context, we now have formal guilds, which are really just meetups, if you will, groups of individuals that want to come together to develop capacity and share their capacity because they're, one, interested in it, and two, it benefits the overall enterprise and its work. So we have a lot of experience now running multiple guilds. We have an individual differences guild that deals with psychological type, social and developmental systems. We have a GTD guild. We have a purpose guild. We have a holacracy guild. We have places where people can come to develop and share capacity. And this has been amazing. We have had a lot of success, and we're thinking about how to broaden and scale this so that others can benefit from these sharing experiences as well. And on the conventional side, there's usually professional development programs or training programs that usually come from outside, as if someone needs to be developed, or sometimes you feel maybe held hostage that you must participate in a program or achieve a particular level of skill to be compensated in a certain way. So again, we're re-envisioning what's absolutely necessary, personal and professional development, and re-envisioning it in a fully power-shifted structure. And the other is the aligning around vision, mission, and values. So that gets a lot of press and a lot of play in conventional systems. And even in holacracy systems where we haven't fully differentiated the culture, there is still a kind of a fallback to the vision, mission, and values as a cohering force, a cohering structure around alignment. So individuals aligned to vision or mission, or individuals expressing a corporate value or organizational value. And I think there's a better way, a healthier way, a clearer way to deal with this, as opposed to having it all fused. I don't think there is a fully power-shifted structure in a fully for-purpose enterprise the need to fuse organization, vision, mission, and values any longer. We have a better way to seek alignment, and that's back to purpose. So in our people context and in our people agreement, we have ways of sensing into our own purpose, making that purpose visible and transparent, and then processes that help us align our own individual purpose to enterprise purpose or the organization's purpose. And so we're seeking always dynamic alignment, purpose alignment between individuals who are free, of course, and autonomous to express their gifts into the world, and the enterprise, which is a separate structure designed to express its purpose into the world. And what we're seeking are a good alignment and relationship between the two. And we've now had a lot of experience sensing into and discovering processes for personal purpose and now enterprise purpose. And this has become a dynamic, ongoing process at encode that I'd like to share a little bit more with you about as we move along. So these are some of the high points of what it feels like inside a fully power-shifted system. All the usual suspects, but reframed. So all the usual things that are needed in terms of running and structuring an organization, capital structures, shareholders, some sort of oversight in a board, fiduciaries and such, but completely reshifted. And then the same for the people, dealing with culture and mentoring and development and intersubjective or interpersonal tension. All of these things are now just reframed from a power-shifted perspective. And there are, of course, more, and we're living into these, and we want to hear your experiences too, to make this a lived experience on how we're bringing this into the world. I'll share with you a heuristic that I'm using and Encode's using to help kind of gauge what does power shifted actually mean. And this comes from my my lived experience with holacracy and living into these systems of looking for patterns, looking for what's different between one system and another. And for me, the heuristic that I follow is a fully power shifted system needs to, one, have a written down rule set. And I think this is seen most exemplary in the holacracy constitution, for example. There's a written down rule set. And that written down rule set binds everyone. No one's exempt. There are no special cases. So everybody plays by the same set of rules. And those rules encode power systemically. They encode power for the whole system and never hold it personally. This is a big, big leap, I think, because there are a lot of written rule sets. There are a lot of interesting techniques and systems that do bind everyone with no special cases. But at some point, there is usually a bridge to personal power holding. And this is the rub. This is where things kind of begin to go sideways and fall back to the conventional. As soon as you have a personal power holder, a shareholder, an owner, a board of directors, or voting rights that encode power more conventionally, then the system begins to collapse. And so what we're looking for is a completely power shifted system following these heuristics, a written down rule set. And for us, that means a written down rule set in the organizational space where the work is done, in the legal and capital space where entities are incorporated legally in various jurisdictions around the world. And as I just talked about, in the people space, means a clearly written down set of rules that encode the behavior norms and the rules of engagement for the culture of the people that come together. So these are the heuristics that we're looking at. And I'll take a breath here and kind of let this stabilize a bit and sink in. See if there might be any questions. Eric, if you can take a look.
Yeah, I can take a look. If you want to raise your hand on the, I can enable your microphone so you can ask the question. So if you want to raise your hand on there, just click on your name and raise your hand. Otherwise, you can just type it in the chat window as well, and I'll just keep an eye out for both. So
awesome. So
I don't see any yet, but I'll keep you posted, Tom.
Cool. So giving you a sense of what it feels like living in this system, I wanted to share with you how we got there. How do we make this real? Again, those were not aspirational experiences. Wouldn't it be nice if we had a replacement for owners? Yes, and we do. Wouldn't it be nice if we had a replacement for classic professional development programs? Yes, we do. Wouldn't it be nice if we had a replacement for teams to make the interactions even better, more intimate, more meaningful? Yes, and we do. And so I want to convey to you that in our living laboratory, we are experimenting with real ways of encoding these power shifts and these structures. And for me, this is possible. This is made possible by the success we've had over the last decade of differentiating the work from the people, differentiating the work from the legal structures, and creating a new rule set like holacracy that encodes power systems to build on. So I think we could not do this work without the foundation that holacracy gives us, a self-organizing rule set that encodes a different power structure. This is kind of the foundation upon which we can now contemplate how to take the same principles that are in holacracy and make them present in those other two systems. So the legal and capital structure system and then the people context system. Now, I will call out my own biases here. As you all know, I'm a co-founder of Holacracy One. I have been in the Holacracy ecosystem for over a decade. I have had huge transformation and beneficial effects from practicing a fully distributed self-organizing system and being in that practice. So I have a deep experience with that. But I don't think it's going to be the only game. I think there will be others for sure. But for me, that power heuristic still stands. In other words, I don't know of any other system right now. And we've looked and we're open and we want to invite others to participate that meets that power heuristic. So Holacracy encodes self-organization in a way that has a clearly written down rule set. It has no privileged classes. In other words, it binds everyone, and it never encodes power personally from the anchor circle inward as it's expressing purposeful work. And this is the heuristic. This is the bar by which other operating systems to self-organize work, I think, must meet so that we can continue to push that out to the endpoints, to the legal and to the people context. So we're building on a decade of experience and even more decades of the early pioneers. I recognize and support and honor those that have come before, all the self-organizing pioneers like Gore and Morningstar, and there's just tons of organizations that have kind of led the way, cleared the path, if you will. And now the whole teal movement is amazing, pointing to these breakthroughs that Fred has documented in his great work. I'm sure everybody on the call has either read or knows about Reinventing Organization and talking about the teal breakthroughs or the teal practices. And we just want to see that fully expressed in all the systems. And so just to kind of leverage off that, teal, or as Fred writes, the breakthroughs are self-management, as he calls it. I would say that's for us self-organization, only nuanced differences maybe in the two. Evolutionary purpose is one of the teal breakthroughs. Everything hangs on purpose. You'll get no argument for me on that. We just want purpose everywhere. We want purpose in the legal and capital structures, and we want purpose in the people structures too. And wholeness, a sense of being able to bring whole self, honoring boundaries, honoring your own sense of destiny and purpose and autonomy, and yes, all of that. So from my perspective, I like those breakthrough principles, or those breakthrough traits. But for me, there are 5 underlying principles that get baked into the rule set to make that happen. And these are the very same principles that are baked into the Holacracy Constitution. And just to kind of review, purpose carries the day. Everything is purposeful in a self-organized system. Purpose is, in our work, clearly defined. We have actually a legal definition that shows up in the legal agreements defining what purpose is. So everybody is clear. We have now clear purpose discovery processes for sensing into and giving voice to evolutionary purpose for the organization or the enterprise, and the same for the individuals. And then back to that seeking alignment of purpose. So purpose is a key component, of course, and for ENCODE and the for-purpose enterprise, it is embedded in anything or everything. Holarchic is that natural structure. I have a love-hate relationship with this word. I don't like the wonky, geeky language all the time, but natural structure, a holarchic structure of whole parts, it applies here. We want a much more organic way of thinking about structuring the work, structuring relationships, structuring our investments. And I am not a fan of flatness. I don't think nature or evolution is a fan of flatness either. There is a natural structure at play in any given system. And in holacracy, we self-organize with accountabilities and roles collected into circles, and circles into broader circles, and broader circles yet still. And this holarchic whole part structure emerges to express purposeful work in the world. We want the same sort of structures at play in the legal and capital and the people contexts. And so we're following these principles at ENCODE to weave them in, bake them into the legal agreements and the people agreements, just like they're baked in to the holacracy constitution and that agreement. So holarchic structure, dynamic, so unattached to outcomes, lean, agile, responsive, any way you want to language it. Yes, more of that. We want to be nimble. We want to change on a dime or pivot. There's all kinds of language cues for this. But instead of just holding this as an aspirational state, these are baked into the agreements themselves. So we don't have to remember all these principles, we just have to practice. And a good rule set allows us to practice with the principles that we care about baked in so that we can help each other in our endeavor. So dynamic or dynamic steering or responsive or lean or agile come to mind here. Autonomy. So this is a really key one back to wholeness, having a sense of the ability to lead your work, lead your investments, be a whole independent person in collaboration or connection with a team. So a high degree of autonomy is baked into the Constitution, of course. One might say it's a system of distributed autocracy. It allows everybody to lead, but yet be coordinated. So we all interact in many ways. We all bump and bounce into one another. That's, of course, going to happen, and it's desirable. It's in those bounces or those connections that we find emergent opportunities. We want a high degree of autonomy and then the ability to process what happens at the intersection when one good thing meets another. So autonomous, and then finally transparency. The system must be radically, highly transparent. As much transparency as you can stomach, as I sometimes say. So again, this is baked into the fabric of the holacracy constitution. It's now baked into the fabric of the legal structures on how we own or invest in a company that is a purposeful endeavor. How do we govern that? Where the rights lie in terms of risk mitigation and liability in a legal framework. And then back over on the people side, a high degree of transparency about our own sense of purpose. Why am I here? Why do I care? Why should I care about you? And why are you here? And having deep, transparent relationships as much as one can stomach. So these are the 5 principles that I find baked into holacracy and generally in the self-organizing movement. These, for me anyway, are what underpin teal practices. Teal practices are purposeful. Fred would say evolutionary purpose, yes. They are have a deep, more natural, organic structure to them. We would say holarchic, yes. They are dynamic, unattached to outcomes, always pursuing purpose, yes. They are transparent, and they're encode a high degree of autonomy. So these are the principles that we want to be able to enact in the world, not just hold aspirationally. So the work that we've been about the last few years is putting this all together. So how do we weave together the capital structures, the work structures, and the relationship structures so that we can reintegrate that which practices like holacracy differentiated from? Remember, I said holacracy was a differentiation event. It said, let there be a distinction. There is a different way to express purposeful work in the world that's not dependent on a people power hierarchy or a management hierarchy. So Great, we've done that. It was silent on legal and capital and ownership structures, and it was silent on people structures. So now is the time to reintegrate those into the broader whole and create a whole system, putting it all together to integrate capital, work, and relationships. So I'd like to kind of walk you through how Encode does that. And just some simple graphics to kind of make the point. First of all, we'll look at the legal context. So the legal context is where an organization, an enterprise, a business, a partnership, a nonprofit, an NGO, whatever the case may be, a community cooperative, where it gets its right to exist in the world. It's legally anchored somewhere in some jurisdiction. And Encode is working all over the world. We have legal agreements in the US, and we've taken steps towards legal agreements in Europe, specifically Germany now, working projects in the Netherlands and in Austria, and also in Switzerland. And the work of Encode is to cultivate relationships with attorneys and law firms that are interested in this new world of work, interested in teal or self-organizing practices, and rethink how legal structures are formed in the world, and how legal structures can incorporate those principles of being purposeful, transparent, dynamic, holarchic, and autonomous. And the good news is we've done some heavy lifting here. We built on some good pioneering work that happened at Holacracy One with its legal agreements. When we launched Encode back in 2015, we worked with Jessica Bentley, a very progressive attorney who helped us refactor H1, Holacracy One's agreement to incorporate these principles that we wanted. We recently partnered with Jason Weiner PC out of Boulder, Colorado, to get us to our version 2.0 of these legal agreements. And we're really pumped about what work we've done there on restructuring LLC agreements to make them no longer for profit and now for purpose. And we are getting ready to launch a project to take that to version 3. So this is an evolving, maturing process, and we have legal templates that we are now ready to share with you, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. But the power-shifted legal structure anchors an enterprise, anchors an endeavor in a particular jurisdiction. And this is complicated stuff, right? So this deals with tax issues and ownership issues and risk. We have taxing authorities in different places in the world, running under different systems and different expectations, but we're making great progress on getting legal structures that are now fully power shifted and fully for purpose. On the organizational side, we rely on Holacracy as the self-organizing system. It provides us 21st century governance. It provides the anchor circle, which is the broadest integration for multiple contexts to be integrated. It brings us the integrative decision-making process that's very mature, and we rely on 21st century governance to integrate the needs of those other two contexts. So back to my statement prior, we could not do this work. I don't think this work to upgrade the people and legal context could happen until we have these mature self-organizing governance systems out in the world. And there are a few. Sociocracy is certainly out there. Holacracy is certainly out there. There are emergent teal practices and others playing in this space. From an Encode standpoint, we are still filtering through that heuristic. So in the organizational context, we're looking for a system that has a clearly written down set of rules, and there are a few that meet that bar. We are looking for those rules to bind everyone again, no privileged classes. And again, there are a few that meet that bar. But the one bar that I think still Holacracy is the only one that meets is to not encode power personally anywhere in the system. There is no personal power holder. And so for us, the power shifted work It resides in the rule set of holacracy, open to others. And the work of ENCODE has been weaving holacracy constitution into the legal foundational agreements, the operating agreements, shareholder agreements, different jurisdictional agreements like in the Netherlands, in Austria and Switzerland and so on. So we're weaving together the legal and the organizational, and then finally the people context. So here we've kind of charted some new territory. This took a while and caused no small amount of frustration for us early pioneers inside ENCODE. Living into the people space before we had a people agreement, an association or an agreement of association. And for the first 18 months or so, it was pretty rocky. But what emerged out of that a couple summers ago was our version 1 association agreement. And there we encode, again, the 5 principles in a way that addresses things that people need in this space. What are the behavior norms? What are the best practices for interaction? What are the tension processing systems? What are the mentee and mentorship processes at play? It specifies operations for the people, the work of the people. How do we structure that work? Where does it live? What gives it the authority to exist? How do we deal with professional development and skills and capacities that we want to either share or learn from others about? So we encode these guilds or special interest groups. And we now have version 1.0 of the people agreement that encodes the rules of the road, if you will, for the people space. And this people context, of course, is integrated back into the broader whole. So for us at ENCODE, we've been crafting on the agreements to create the integrated structures of legal, organizational, and people. These 3 contexts come together in a structure called a 4-purpose enterprise. And the 4-purpose enterprise now is a system of clearly written rules, binds everyone, no privilege classes, including owners, founders, and investors. And it fully distributes and systematizes authority where no power is held personally anywhere in the system. And so this is something that exists today and is something that ENCODE is living into, and others are now experimenting with taking steps into the space, into the 4-purpose enterprise structure. Tying it all together is a feature of the holacracy constitution. It's the anchor circle, or the broadest integration point of evolutionary purpose. And we have made the connections to integrate cross-links and different perspectives that are needed to continuously steer towards evolutionary purpose. And we'll go into this diagram, of course, in this survey webinar, but happy to dive deeper into these constructs, and I'll be mentioning a little bit more about our plans to do just that. So for ENCODE, it's all about now the 4-purpose enterprise. How do we get more of these into the world where everything hangs on purpose and people have the freedom to choose purposeful work, purposes that they care about, and help express that work into the world. So the 4-purpose enterprise comes about, again, not through aspirational thinking. Wouldn't it be nice if that just all worked? But through kind of the nuts and bolts and boring, sometimes mind-numbing work of writing these things down. And this is something that ENCODE is offering now the folks that are interested in this space, legal foundations, legal documents and templates that actually write down in executable rules everything that I've just talked about. We have a founding member agreement, which documents and chronicles a new pathway for entrepreneurs to launch purposeful endeavors, not as founders fused with their vision, but as kind of stewards or midwives birthing a purpose into the world and seeding that purpose into a structure, an enterprise, to fully express it. So we have a founding member agreement that documents a brand new pathway for entrepreneurs. We have the operating agreement in the US. This is again at version 2.0 level with plans to move to version 3.0. So a new way of anchoring a purposeful enterprise in the United States. We have state of Nevada, state of Colorado, and contemplating others to register an LLC with a highly modified operating agreement that makes it everything for purpose. So we have operating agreement. Membership grant agreement is a replacement for the employment agreement or employee offer agreement. And it makes everyone a legal member of this enterprise, a legal member partner, and opens up a whole new vista of rethinking the relationship between the worker and the work, the worker and the investor. So we have the membership grant agreement. Confidentiality and IP, intellectual property is of course relevant for all endeavors, especially professional services, sometimes not quite so much in others, but we have reframed the classic confidentiality and IP agreement to align with these principles that we've talked about here this morning. And then the association agreement or the people context. What are the rules of the road there that we are all agreeing to follow? And the interesting thing on that association agreement, it puts purpose right up front. So in that preamble, everyone states to the best of their ability and current understanding what their personal purpose is, and makes that visible and transparent so that we can align personal purpose with the organizational or enterprise purpose. So these are actual documents that exist in reality and can be used to anchor legal structures in the United States. We have varying degrees of work activity going on in Europe. In Austria, we have a hybrid going there that's probably 70 to 80% of what we've encoded in the US form. We've had a couple starts in the Netherlands, but haven't crossed the finish line there, but have a interesting start on either a cooperative or a BV structure that incorporate these principles. In Austria, it's the GmbH Co-KG hybrid. We're working with an attorney in Germany right now to get across the finish line with a German structure. And we're also working with an attorney in Switzerland on the community cooperative or Swiss cooperative structure, which is really interesting. So we have ongoing activities, projects to encode these principles in other legal jurisdictions. So we have multiple pathways for companies all over the world, entrepreneurs all over the world. So those are the foundational documents. We have financial instruments, brand new ways of thinking about being an investor in these four purpose endeavors, these four purpose enterprises. So no longer are you a shareholder with voting rights or the owner that controls, but you're an investor with multiple classes or stakes, if you will, in the endeavor, multiple stakes in the enterprise. So we have different share classes, different membership units or investment stakes available based on your need and ability to invest. So we have the classic capital units for sure. We have brand new allocation units that allow us to encode the principles of slicing pie back to the dynamic equity constructs that I talked about. And we have these agreements that make them real. So the ability to take money through these loan agreements. It's a way of getting capital into a system dynamically. We have conversion agreements. One unit, one class of stock can be converted to another. And this opens up all new vistas when you think about investing in an enterprise. The ability to invest maybe as a profit investor, getting compensated for your work, and then accumulating another type of investment that's able to convert to yet a long-term investment. So again, it allows you to be an investor short-term, mid-term, long-term in purpose, and the ability to convert back and forth between the different types of investments, following that dynamic principle. Re-envisioning how people get paid. So Encode has been through a couple different compensation or now earnings plans to make it align with the principles too, and to really rethink what compensation actually is anyway. And we do see it more as an earnings plan, a return on investment, in this case, time. Individuals contributing their time, their energy, their talent in return for something, an earnings return on that investment. So we have rethought and restructured classic compensation systems, and again, one of the other conversion documents. So these are the templates that are available that's now possible to enact the for-purpose enterprise in the world. Just continuing on with our living laboratory, we're in an ongoing experiment to re-envision as much as we can. And so we now have new ways of thinking about maintaining purpose alignment. We just recently went through an enterprise purpose discovery process using the True Purpose Institute methodology with Tim Kelly, and had awesome results. We encoded that process in the governance system. So we have an app, if you will, for enterprise purpose discovery that is congruent, compatible with all the other constructs that we've talked about, that allows us to express a overall enterprise purpose. And then these purpose guilds that I mentioned going on inside the people context, allowing individuals to come together and sense and discover and articulate their personal purpose, and in an ongoing practice of keeping that purpose fresh and meaningful and relevant to their work. So we're encoding purpose alignment features, financial investment and instrument features, and foundational legal structures to make all of this work. And this is what we want to share. We want to share with others that are interested in this. We have a new offering that is coming online in February. Everyone here on the call or registered for the call will be invited as one of the early members of this PowerShift community, as we're calling it. So there are a lot of associations, there are Slack channels, there are community of practice programs, there's the responsive groups and the teal practice groups. All of that's awesome, great, and super needed. But we thought there was an opportunity, there might be a gap in all of that, where people could come together and talk about the power shift. So not just incremental improvements to existing power structures, but actually shifting the underlying power paradigm. And so here we've created a PowerShift community. We've invested last year over the summer in a community platform to hold interactions, discussions, forums, all the classic things you would expect in a community software platform, to focus on topics of interest to a PowerShift community. And this will be launching in February. And all of those experiences that I listed at the very beginning of our session, what does it feel like to be in a for-purpose enterprise in a fully power-shifted endeavor? Those are all potential topics that we can have in the PowerShift community. Sessions like this to do a deeper dive on any one of those particular topics, to dig into, well, how do you move from teams to role relationships? Or how do you think about dynamic equity as opposed to predictive capital structures amongst founder entrepreneurial partners? And really dig into how do we shift into a more purposeful, power-shifted economy of individuals and enterprises interested in this in the world. And so we're really excited about that. We'll be launching, like I said, in February. It's one of our bigger initiatives. You'll get information about that. We also have the ongoing activities, of course, with the legal jurisdictions. That work is hard, but moving forward and progressing. And we're kind of coming back full circle. So we started with focusing on dynamic startup. Encode had a startup. We didn't want to use the conventional pathway, so we pioneered some things like the founding member agreement. Then we had to re-envision the board and the anchor circle, and then re-envision the people context to create all these agreements. And we kind of find ourselves full circle back to the legal and capital structures. So now we have projects to think into what does it take to get capital to scale. And this is an issue, of course, for many entrepreneurial endeavors and startups. How do you find purpose capital, and how do you deploy purpose capital? So Encode is cultivating relationships with an investment bank and exploring distributed ways, decentralized ways of rethinking capital raises. So we're looking at the blockchain and crypto currency space to look at different ways of raising capital. There's been a lot of interesting experiments, for good or for bad, in this space over the last couple of years on the whole crypto space in general, the ICOs specifically. And now it seems as regulatory bodies get more involved, which is a good thing, there's an emergent offering called the security token offering. And these are things that Encode is now circling back to revisit. How do we embed this in the for-purpose power-shifted economy that we imagine? So this was a whirlwind tour survey of kind of what we've been up to over the last several months, bringing in a power-shifted, purposeful structure, the for-purpose enterprise. And so I will kind of, again, pause. Thank you for showing up. Apologies again for the misstart in the morning, but I think we got things back on track. And if you do have any questions, we're in no rush. We allocated a lot of time for Q&A. So if you have them, Eric can recognize you, turn on your mic, and we can dig into some fun dialogue. But thank you everybody for showing up. For those of you that have helped to contribute to this work, thank you again. And for those interested in furthering this work, we are actively asking for your help. Please participate. Please help us envision what this power shift looks like in the world.
Okay, everybody, let's see here. I've got, well, if there's a number of questions in the chat window. I think we've addressed some of them. If you can go to your, on the bottom of your screen, you can raise your hand. And if you do that, I'll turn your mic on. We don't have anybody right now. So Tom, just some questions. How many people working for Encode right now?
Yeah, we've had 15 members over the history of the enterprise. And the interesting thing is it's very dynamic, go figure. So we have people with varying focus times, sometimes at 100%, sometimes they partner or a member will throttle down to less than that, all the way down to 20% or so. We measure it by full focus equivalence. Kind of like the FTE number metric. So we've had anywhere from 2 or 3 all the way up to 10 or 11 full focus equivalents over the 3-year period.
Okay, let's see. What has been the level of interest to shift from power systems from business owners? From Larry.
Yeah, so it's the same sort of motivation I think we find with as the power holder. Business owners, executives, the entrepreneur, they have every right to hold the power and make a decision. And the decision or the interest, the motive, comes from, I think, getting a little frustrated with status quo structures that feel like you're beating your head against the wall and not getting the results you want. This is similar to the same motivation that inspires business owners to adopt practices like TEAL practices, sociocracy or holacracy. It's like you tried all kinds and varieties of things and still get the same undesirable results. And a better way is to get everyone involved in purpose, to delegate and distribute authority so everybody can participate, to broaden the sensor net, if you will, to have multiple perspectives at play, to add diversity to an organization. So they're very practical matters. Oftentimes, I think the business owner or entrepreneur is rightly so fused to the purpose and what that purpose can do in the world and how that can benefit the world, and finds that the best way to get that purpose into the world is to surrender it or seed it into one of these self-organizing systems. And I think that's the motivation. And I see that more and more. I get the opportunity to go around the world and speak with folks about these kind of issues and topics. And I think business owners are ready for a different way to get more purposeful work in the world. And so I see this just getting more traction as we go along.
Good, okay. How do people in these systems manage these shifts in their identity or sense of self?
Yeah, so a couple things happen here. It does change your relationship with your work and how much your work is tied into your own story about your self-worth, right? So it really changes the relationship with your own sense of purpose and contribution to an enterprise's purpose or work. It kind of turns the lights on, if you will. And so if you're a leader, for example, and you're used to identifying with leading people, and you install a self-organizing system that's all about leading the work, this will really push hard against you. It will have an egoic kind of effect of, well, what value do I bring if I'm not leading people? It's reinterpreting or refactoring your understanding of your work by doing things that support the broader purpose. And so this is a huge shift. It's a generational shift. It's absolutely a cultural shift. It's getting your self-worth from moving things towards purpose exclusively and not towards the relationships of other people. Now, back on the people context, it gets a lot more intimate and a lot more transparent with the people you hang out with. There are less barriers or filters between you and the other. There's not a power dynamic. And you're just kind of all in together. And so it allows you to have different relationships and use people as sounding boards, mirrors, mentors, whatever, and develop deeper personal relationships. So it does transform completely your meaning-making system for self and your relationship to your work and your relationship to the others that are doing that work with you. It is a big deal.
Are there other entities other than ENCODE who have embraced living into this power shift, and who are they?
Yeah, so a handful at varying levels of practice. So we have Evolution at Work, which is an organization that launched not long after ENCODE launched, that is operating under the same legal agreements, organizational agreements, and people agreements. We have in Austria an organization that has shifted legal agreements and organizational agreements, capital and financial structures, and are experimenting with different people or cultural agreements. In the Netherlands, We have an organization that is working to change its legal agreements, but has absolutely changed its people or cultural agreements and integrating to organizational structures that are completely self-organized. So it kind of crosses a spectrum. There are folks that are stepping into this space and have varying degrees of alignment with the full for-purpose enterprise. We've had other organizations that have fully adopted and transitioned to something else. So we're still in the very early stages of the early pioneers understanding and living into this.
Great. Can you say more about the purpose discovery processes and purpose evolution for an organization?
Yeah, so one of the things that is a hallmark to holacracy practice and teal practices is this notion of evolutionary purpose. Purpose is an ongoing discovery. It's never something that you know completely, but something that you better understand over time. So it's kind of like an unveiling. You know the purpose by doing the work. The more you do in the world, the better you can understand your doing in the world. And so there are different types of practices to sense into that, both individually and organizationally. At Encode, we have, as I just mentioned, kind of experimented with the True Purpose Institute practice of figuring out how to better sense into your personal purpose, and then how to align that purpose with the organization's purpose. We have written a concrete app, if you will, or a process that has been adopted for enterprise purpose discovery, specifying the process steps that we go through. When someone in the system senses that the enterprise or organizational purpose might be ready for an improvement or an upgrade, there's a triggering process, and then that triggers a discovery process, which then triggers a governance process to propose a new enterprise purpose. So it's an evolutionary ongoing thing. It's a never arriving, always deepening your understanding of purpose.
Great, great questions. We've got a few left here. Are you planning on licensing use of your various agreements, operating agreements and such?
Yeah, no is the short answer. Of course, we're deep into sensing what the appropriate business form and structure should be inside the organization. And our current thinking is that the templates are open source. So we're going to launch open source templates in the PowerShift community as a start, and then look for the value exchange happen to apply those templates in a specific context for a specific enterprise. So at present, we're not looking at licensing or putting a very high barrier to access.
Great. Tom, can you give specific examples of the rules of conflict resolution and difficult conversations?
Yeah, so one of the behavior norms in our people agreement, our association agreement, is first, when you are triggered by someone, first understand, take a breath, pause, understand that both of you are there for purpose. And this is part of our practice. Remember that association agreement has in its preamble, you know the other person's purpose, you know your own purpose, and you know that individuals have different preferences and different perspectives, and you first recognize that everyone is here for purpose. And you kind of fall back to that state and shift to an appreciative inquiry state, appreciating that everyone is for purpose and getting curious. Where is the friction coming from? What does this person see that maybe I don't see? Or maybe what am I holding or protecting that this individual doesn't see? And it re-invites or invites into a different type of conversation. Difficult conversations come into play. We have different methods for dialoguing about that, either one-on-one different rules for when there is high charge versus low charge, and the ability to call in an outside facilitator to enter into a more moderated or facilitated discussion to process the tension. So we're using the same vernacular that we find in holacracy. Tension is just a gap between a present state and a desired state. And when that happens between two individuals, we have a gap between a present state and a desired state, and we're seeking to process that tension. And so it's documented in our agreement, what's the minimally sufficient step? Take a breath, pull back, and recognize we're both here for purpose. Now what? Take a breath, recognize that we're bringing different perspectives and different values, and get curious. What are those at play? And then have a more structured conversation about integrating those perspectives. And then if that doesn't work, fall back to a more mediated process. And then if that doesn't work, go back to the guild that is structured to better understand individual differences and preferences and dig in more deeply. So it's a multimodal approach.
Great. Looks like we have one last question. And everybody feel free to raise your hand and I can turn on your mic if you want to ask it in person. So that'd be great. But the last question I have here, Tom, is are you familiar with Bonita Roy's OPO system? And if so, how does that relate?
I am familiar with Bonita. She and I go way back to early Holacracy 1 days and have had many interactions. I'm not as familiar with her current work, but would enjoy learning more about any practices. We're in dialogue with many practitioners and people in this space, re-envisioning these techniques to be more aligned with these principles. And we see it as a big place. As long as it's aligning with self-organizing principles and following these power heuristics, we want a big field of play, lots of techniques and methods.
Great, that looks like it's it. If anybody else has, we can take more time if you want. But other than that, we don't have any other questions, Tom.
All right, so we're right at the end of our allotted time, just before the bottom of the hour. Thanks everyone from Europe in your afternoon, and in the States in your morning, and maybe Asia Pacific, and whatever time zone you find yourself, time of day. Thank you all for showing up and for your questions. And we look forward to great things in 2019 together.